Okay, good evening to you.
Good evening. Yes. How are you, Kiran?
Fine, thank you.
Ready for the session.
I'm really looking forward to it. Very excited. Very honoured to be asked.
Thank you. So this is going to be the first session of the day, and we will start with you, and a lot of people would be joining.
Yes.
So, yeah.
No, that's fine. That's not going to throw me. I assumed that's what would happen. It always happens at the first session, doesn't it?
Yes. Great.
So I hear day one went very well, and you're very pleased with the numbers.
Yes. Yesterday was really great, and we're looking forward for the same response. Would you like me to ask any question and then give it to you, or should I just introduce you and you can take over then?
If you introduce me, I'll take over. And are you going to? Are we encouraging audience to ask questions in chat, or will I take questions at the end? Yes, sure. Okay.
Yes.
So if you can monitor those for me, and I will deal with questions at the end. Otherwise, I tend to find I lose my flow.
Yes. I'll definitely do that.
Great, thank you. Is podcasting particularly large in Asia? I couldn't find any major statistics on India particularly.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get you.
Yeah, are there many podcasters in India yet?
Yes.
Growing
there are. It's growing. It took a time for us to really get into that phase. Yeah, now there are really a lot of many people, and they're doing really great.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And it's such an interesting session, podcasting on building the brand through it. So it's going to be really great to see how people take away what people can take away from this session.
Yes.
Students, a lot of students and entrepreneurs, how they're going to use this knowledge to build their own brand through podcasting.
It's always interesting from my side because you never know quite what the audience is going to be fired by. There's always something that you say, and it's not usually what you expect as the main message that people get excited by. So we'll see.
Yes. So, Anuj, we are going to start at exact 45.
Not India time then.
Yes. So let me start admitting people so that they can join gradually.
Sure. So a lot of people are joining, and hello everyone. If you can just put in the chat box a hi or hello, or from where you are joining, that'll be really great. We're going to start the session in 1 or 2 minutes, and till then we can have your comments in the section. We're just waiting for a few more people to join, and we'll kickstart the session. Then I'll be your host for the session, and we are starting the second day with a very interesting session with Kiran Kapur. The session is power of podcasting for building your brand, and I'm sure that a lot of you people will love this session, and there will be a lot of key insights and takeaway from her. So without further ado, let me welcome Kiran Kapur here. Welcome, Kiran, to Digital Asia Summit, and glad to have you on board as a speaker and as a mentor for the session. So the session,
Thank you.
Yeah. Kiran Kapur is the CEO of Cambridge Marketing College, a chartered marketer and a fellow of CIM. She has worked prominently in financial services with expertise in customer relationship marketing and customer communications. As a consultant, she has worked as a project manager with companies including Liverpool, Victoria, Barclays, London Life, and Casanova. She presents Cambridge Weekly Marketing podcast in association with Star Radio. So her podcast majorly revolves around marketing and what's going in at the Cambridge Marketing College. So today's session, as you know, podcasting is a growing field. India, a lot of new podcasting influencers are coming on board, and it's a really growing field. And we would love to know more about the podcasting and how it can build the brand. So through podcasting, brands can communicate what they stand for directly to an audience, building a long-lasting relationship. That is based on shared values and shared storytelling experience. So I'll hand over the session to Kiran now, and hope you guys have fun. And those who have comments, any questions, they can put in the comments, and towards the end of the session, we'll take up the questions, and Kiran will try to answer these for us. Thank you so much. Let's stop the video.
Hello and welcome everybody. I'm honoured to be invited to speak to you today. I am Kiran Kapur. I am the CEO of the Cambridge Marketing College, and I'm a very, very passionate podcaster. So it is my hope to show you my passion, share my passion and my excitement about podcasting and why I think it is so important for branding. So I am speaking to you today from the UK and the very beautiful city of Cambridge, home of a rather famous university and punting and the River Backs. The only thing I will say is that Cambridge is constantly being rebuilt, so you may occasionally hear diggers offside. That is merely one of the colleges sorting themselves out. The Cambridge Marketing College is not part of Cambridge University. It is an independent training provider, and we teach marketing and PR to our practicing marketing professionals. So I'm here to talk about podcasting and why podcasting is so important. So to set the scene, I'm going to give a little bit of history about who I am and the podcasting that I do. We're going to talk a little bit about the global podcast landscape, just how many podcasts there are in the world. Then obviously we're going to come to the heart of the matter as to why podcasting is so important for branding and why it matters so much. I'm going to cover a little bit of the practicalities of doing a podcast. We're going to look at the one unsung hero of a podcast and the one thing that is, in my view, absolutely non-negotiable if you want to do podcasting well. And then we'll look at some final tips, and I'll be more than happy to take questions at the end. So a little history. I have been podcasting since January 2014, well before podcasting was particularly established. I began on a radio station with a short season of shows. It was originally 12 shows. That became another 12 shows, then a 6-month stint, and so on. Then I had a short break. I was promoted to the CEO at the college, and I had a little break. And then in 2020, we started again, and I now record 2 shows a week. The main podcast, the Cambridge Marketing Podcast, airs on a Friday. My latest episode went out today. And that has a marketing or PR guest and a single topic. So today's is all around organizational culture. Last week we were looking at, I actually had somebody on who was an expert at B2B podcasting. I do recommend that particular episode if you're interested in podcasting for your brand. Next week, I have a guest on who's going to be talking about the metaverse. And I also record Opinionated Marketers on a Tuesday. This is a discussion format. It is with myself and the founder of the college, Associate Professor Charles Nixon. And we take something that is very much of the moment. We could be something about marketing in a recession. Very recently in the UK, we've been dealing with the death of our monarch. So we discussed what you do in a time of national mourning as a marketer. How do you communicate? So we make that one very, very relevant, very current, very up to date, whereas the Friday podcast has a longer life. And that's a very important part of podcasting, the length of life post the show. So how did all this start? Well, it began with a radio station. The UK has a very strong radio landscape with national and local stations. And one of the Cambridge local stations is called Star Radio. And they were looking back in 2013, so before I started, for more advertisers. And they came to see if we would like to advertise with them. And I said, no, we are a national and international college. We have national and international students, and advertising in Cambridge was not of interest to me. So they said something that actually changed the entire way we produced our learning materials. They said, why don't you do a show which will be broadcast through an actual radio, but we'll give you the recording afterwards that you can use for your teaching materials. And suddenly we realized that this was a resource, a digital resource that we could use for teaching our students. And we thought this was a great idea. And to be honest, I couldn't believe my luck when I could present. I am a passionate consumer of speech-based radio and have been since childhood. Given a chance, I would listen and could listen to radio and speech-based podcasts all day long. So to be invited to present an actual radio show, to come out of an actual radio, was all my dreams come true. And then the hard work begins. And that's what we will discuss when we get to the practicalities of a podcast section. But the photo you can see is actually of my first day in the studio. You can see in those days, we literally were in a radio studio with the mics and the mixer tape decks in front of you. All that is not necessary for podcasting, but it was very necessary for radio. So that's a little bit about me and why I'm so passionate about podcasts. Let's talk a little bit about the global podcast landscape. These figures were taken from June 2022, and I have to say the numbers have only gone up since then. But in June of this year, there were 2.4 million podcasts globally. And between them, they had 66 million episodes. To put that in context, there are 66 million people in the United Kingdom in our total population. So there is one podcast for every person, one podcast episode for every person that lives in the United Kingdom. The estimated listenership is over 383 million globally. That is going up. The biggest marketplace for podcast listening in the world is the United States, and they are still the world leaders in reaching podcast and reaching audience. The next area that you should go to look for podcasting is Scandinavia. And Scandinavia, that's Norway, Sweden, Finland. Much, much smaller, don't have as many population, but each member of that population listens to more podcasts than they do in America. The most growing area for podcasts in the world at the moment is Latin America, closely followed by Asia, and which is why you are in a superb place to make use of the podcasting and the rise of podcasting for your brand. The most popular genres for podcasting are comedy, first and foremost. The most popular podcast in the world is by Seth Rogen, who is a comedian, an American comedian and actor. The next most popular is sport, followed by religion. And then after that, you get some sort of niche areas. True crime is very, very popular in the UK and in the States for some reason. But it is worth thinking that for your brand, you don't need to reach a huge audience. What you are looking for is your segment audience, your niche audience. And the most exciting thing about podcasting, it's a long form content. The average length of a podcast is between 20 and 40 minutes. I cannot think of anything else that we produce as marketers that you can hold somebody's attention for that length of time. Corporate videos, we watch them for 3 minutes, perhaps 5 minutes. For advertisements, 30 seconds maybe as long as you get. But a podcast will sit in your listener's ear for between 20 and 40 minutes on a regular basis. And it's an incredibly intimate medium, which is why it is so exciting for brands. However, one of the questions you are probably asking is, how do you know if you've got a successful podcast? Well, I give these figures out because they are the standard figures that the industry uses, but I am going to give them out with a slight warning that the number of listeners that you have will be very specific to your niche of podcast. However, according to Buzzsprout, which is the world's largest sharing platform for podcasts, they host over 85,000. If within 7 days of your new episode, you get 29 downloads, you are in the top 50% of podcasts in the world. That may be lower than you expected. Downloads are not listeners. The reason we measure downloads is because these listeners have committed to your podcast. They want to keep it, or they're holding on to it to listen to it at a more convenient time. Podcast downloads, if you get 101 in the first 7 days, you are in the top 25% of podcasts. If you want to be up in the top 1% of the world, you need over 4,500 downloads. But as I said, do not get too hung up on downloads. What you are concerned about is reaching your niche market. If you want to get some more statistics, including by your own country or by the listener type that you're trying to reach, I've given the link at the bottom of the slide. Buzzsprout.com publishes podcast statistics very, very regularly, and they keep them up to date, and Buzzsprout is also a great place for information on podcasts generally. So given all of that, and given that there is a podcast landscape, why should you think about this for your brand? The point about a podcast is it quite literally gives a voice to your brand. And it gives a voice for your brand, as I've said, for 20 to 40 minutes at a time. That's a huge amount of attention that you can grab of your audience. Podcasts are listened to at times that you cannot reach people in any other way. People listen to podcasts while they are doing something else. So they listen to you in their cars when they're driving. They listen when they're doing housework or when they're exercising. I have lost count of the number of students that have told me they listen to my podcast on their early morning run. 7 in the morning, there they are, pounding the streets, listening to me and the Opinionated Marketers or the Cambridge Marketing Podcast. that gives your brand a huge level of authority. You've got a voice, you've planned out your content, you are clearly demonstrating that you are an expert in your field. And in a growing marketplace for podcasts, like Asia, you also make your brand seem very innovative. You're cutting edge, you are podcasting. It is worth thinking about the style of the podcast. So, because you need a style that will fit with your brand. So it can be just one person talking. 40% of podcasts are done that way. It's quite hard to do as a podcast host. And I suspect it's one of the reasons why a lot of podcasts fall by the wayside. You think it's going to be easy, it's just you talking. It's incredibly hard to keep the momentum up, the interest up, and to find new topics if it's just you speaking. You can also have an interview format, and second most popular style of podcast, because you have an expert on who you can interview and talk to. My own podcast, the main podcast, is interview format, and that fits my brand specifically because it allows me to suggest that we are an education institute, we are an authority on marketing, and we encourage conversation, debate, and discussion. So subliminally, by having that interview style and the debate style that I have on opinionated marketers, I am telling my learners and my potential learners that they can join the conversation. The other type of format that you can have different types of interview formats. You can have a debate, but you can also have, and debates can be argumentative. You can really have a go at a discussion or at a topic. That works very well in some arenas. It may work well for your brand. So think about, again, the style that you want to introduce for your brand. And remember, you must podcast over a period of time. You are booking time in the listener's schedule, in their downtime. So they expect to be able to come back to you week by week and listen to the next episode. A one-off podcast is frankly a waste of time. If that's what you're going to do, just do it as video. Don't try and do podcasting unless you have at least 12 weeks worth of topics that you want to cover. Then you have a story to tell. Then you are using the power of your brand, and you are bringing that brand authority to your podcast. You'll need somewhere where you host your podcast. This is mine, the Cambridge Marketing Podcast. You can see this is in fact open to everybody. Anybody can log in, and I'm hosted on Podbean. You can see the number of episodes. You can see the number of downloads. That is public information. You can see my last two podcasts, my guest, Harry Morton, who I recommended that you listen to, who works for a branded podcast agency, producing podcasts for B2B market. And you can see our last Opinionated Marketers, where actually we decided we were going to do a book review because it was something that we thought was of interest. And we were talking about the demographic change and how the world is getting both older and younger. If you're wondering whether podcasts are just B2C, here are some podcasts that I picked relatively at random because I wanted to see the wide range and show you the wide range of podcasts that you can cover. So on the top of your screen, we have the World Cement Organization producing the Clinker Factor podcasts. These are specifically about how the cement industry can reduce its environmental impact. And every week they have a guest talking about reducing the carbon output of the cement and construction industry. Caterpillar, Big Yellow Diggers, have their own podcast produced by Caterpillar Inc., and it talks all about the excavation industry. And then on the other side of your screen, in a completely different style, that's the HPZ, who create workstations, and they have an interview style podcast where they are talking to experts around creativity. So the one highlighted there is about shaping virtual production, but they also talk about designing for emotion, and other stories all around design, and it's for a design audience. So I just wanted to give you an idea of the huge range of podcasts that there are. And maybe they don't get those hundreds of downloads, but if they're reaching their target audience, they are giving their brand authority. Okay, so a little bit about some of the practicalities around podcasting. You need to have worked out your thoughts. You need to have worked out the story that you want to tell. And there is one unsung hero: the sound editor. This, in my view, is the one non-negotiable thing about podcasting. Too many podcast hosts think that they can present and edit. And in my view, you can't. You do not have the space to sit back and go, is that good or isn't it? So the photo on your screen is of my lovely sound editor, Daniel Fox, who is a presenter on Star Radio, but also an incredibly gifted sound editor. He and I are in each other's ears twice a week, every week. And I trust Daniel completely with the quality output of my podcast. You need that level of trust between yourself and your sound editor. Daniel says that he does 3 edits of every podcast. Bearing in mind, Opinionated Marketer is a 10-minute podcast, and my Friday interview is between 20 and 25 minutes. He listens to each of those 3 times. The first edit is actually done as we record. He is always in on the recording with me. He's in the background. I can't see him. We're not physically in the same building. But what he's doing is listening to the technical sound quality. So he will make certain that when 2 people are talking, the sound levels are the same. We've all heard podcasts where one half is louder than the other. Sound editor's job is to balance that up. I was listening to a podcast during the week where the podcast was great. They'd interspersed a lot of music, and the music volume was much higher. I was trying to listen to this at the gym, and I had to keep adjusting the volume up and down. And after about 2 or 3 times, I gave up. It was too much effort. That is what a sound editor does. They make certain that technically it is excellent. The second time he goes through, he is listening for content. And Daniel has the phrase listener benefit. If what I have recorded is not of benefit to the listener, it doesn't matter how great I think it is, or my guest thought it was, Daniel will ruthlessly cut it out. So that content editing is very important with the thought, what is the listener benefit? And then he does a final edit, which is just a polish. Are there any ums? Are there any stumbles? All of that can be quietly edited. Did a phone go off in the background? Did next door's digger decide to go off? As I said, we are in Cambridge. That is that final edit to make certain that everything sounds perfect. And then I know that I have a really decent podcast. So, as I said, the unsung hero of podcasting is that sound engineer. You need that. The other thing, and you will realize this from that 3 times of having to do the editing, you need time. Podcasting is not something that you do on a whim. You have to commit to it. You need a committed sound editor who you trust, and you need to build up that relationship. You also need, as the host, the presenter, to have time. Said at the beginning, I have been podcasting since January 2014. I still spend at least an hour preparing for each interview that I record, and I make that commitment. I've chosen the guest. We've agreed what they're going to talk about. I don't agree with questions, but I will then do my background research. If they're talking about a book, I will at least want it to have skim read it. If they're talking about a subject, I will want to have looked at it and worked out the sort of questions that my listeners want to hear. And then it's my job as host to make certain that if they say something and it's not clear, that I ask the questions. So committing that time to the podcast is incredibly important for a quality output. Do not go into this if you've just got one episode and only a limited amount of time. So you've listened to all of that. I hope I've convinced you that podcasting will allow you to have brand authority and that you can bring across your stories. And you're thinking, okay, that sounds like quite a lot of work. There's another way of getting into podcasting. Go on someone else's. So how do you do that and what do you do? Well, to begin with, you need to do your research. So the best place I have found to find new podcasts is this search engine, Listen Notes. There are others. This is the one that I use. It allows you to search for podcasts by topic or even by host. The name that's come up there, Nish Kumar, is a host of a podcast. So if there's somebody podcast you particularly want to go on, you can find them. If there's a topic area that you want to look at, put that in. Then you need to do some work. You want to check the style of podcast. Will it fit your brand? If you have an innovative brand, maybe you want a sort of slightly light-hearted, perhaps a jokier, perhaps a trendier podcast than mine is. If you want an authoritative, calmer podcast, you will be listening for those different styles and you are looking to fit it with your brand. Check the length of the podcast. Don't do this as a blanket approach. Take one podcast at a time. Listen to the type of podcast that it is. You don't have to listen to a whole show, but get some idea. Is it a discussion? Is it just one person talking? If it's only ever the host talking, there is no point in approaching to go on as an interview guest. Then think about what the host wants to know. So, the one thing that I always want to know is what you sound like. Nerves I can deal with. Nerves are no problem. Somebody coming on and stumbling over what they say, we can edit out. And Daniel will do a magnificent job of that in the background. What we can't change is whether you sound excited about what you're talking about. And if you don't sound excited about it, I will struggle to get the listeners engaged. So the way that you speak about your topics is very important. So contact the host, give them some key topics that you might be able to talk about, so that as a host, I've got some idea of what you are going to come on and discuss. If there are any time zone limits, put those in as well. A lot of podcast hosts are based in the US and increasingly in the UK. You may well have a time zone problem. I've just recently had to turn down somebody who sounded like a wonderful guest, but unfortunately we simply couldn't make the time zone work. Don't expect a fee. That is not what normally happens in a podcast. You are normally giving up your time in order to get the exposure of being on a podcast. Some podcasters may pay you a fee. If you're particularly expert in your area, you might be paid, but certainly my own podcast doesn't, and most won't. If there's a book or something you want to promote, be upfront about that. But to remember, podcast hosts will have their own rules about how much promotion you can do. So for example, in my podcast, if you come on, I will introduce you as the author of the book at the beginning of the interview, and I will round off my mentioning the book at the end of the interview. But I do not allow throughout the interview, in my book, I said. Other podcasters will be different. You need to work out what it is that you want for your brand, the way you want to promote. I said that the host wants to hear how you sound. So when you contact, send a clip to you talking. It might be another podcast you've been on, that's fine. It might be a video that you've done, or you can be really innovative, and I've had a few of these, where people have spent 5 minutes creating a recording just to the podcast host. Podcast hosts have egos. We like to know that you care. We like to know that you've thought about who we are and why you might want to come onto our podcast. There are plenty of podcasts to choose from. So do be selective in your approach. And remember that going on a podcast takes your own time to prepare. So don't try and do too many, because you can end up sounding quite robotic if you do one after another. You lose the passion and the excitement in your voice. If all that still sounds a bit too much like hard work, there are agencies that will get you podcast slots. I am not endorsing Speak On podcasts. I can just tell you that I've been approached by them and I've had some good guests through them. There are many other agencies in the world that will help you get onto podcasts. The way that works is that you tell them your area of expertise, so what your brand, how you want your brand to be represented, what topics you want to talk about. They create a sheet and some clips and explain to the host why the host should take you on. And the agency will charge you as the speaker. I do not pay a fee as the podcaster. You pay it as the speaker, and you say to the agency, you agree how many podcasts you want to go on, in what area, over what time period, and the fee is based on that. So some very, very final tips. I hope all that has been useful and you have come away thinking, yes, podcasting is something that I really want to do for my brand. It is a fantastic way to give you brand authority. As I said, it is a fantastic way of getting into your audience ears in a very intimate way and literally giving a voice to your brand. But the non-negotiables are you need to give it time, you need to commit, and you must have that sound editor. I hope that's convinced you, and best of luck if you decide to go into podcasting. Those are my 2 podcasts. If you want to hear me at any time, thank you so much for listening. It's gone very quiet the other end. Do we have any questions?
Thank you so much, Kiran, for the amazing session and for the insights. If anyone has any questions, you can ask in the comment box, and I'll be sharing with Kiran and she can answer those.
I can see some questions coming in about how do you actually do a podcast, the sort of practicalities of doing a podcast. My advice is for how do I get my podcast put onto Buzzsprout, or what equipment do I need to record? My advice is to go to Buzzsprout, which has a huge amount of very, very practical information. There is an entire section on there for beginner podcasters, which will take you through everything that you need. So rather than me trying to explain here, I thoroughly recommend Buzzsprout. There are other places that will give you advice. Listen Notes actually has its own section on beginning podcasting. Those are good places to start. Most importantly, what you need is headphones and a microphone and somewhere quiet to record from without distractions. That's the beginning part of your podcast.
We are getting one more question, Kiran. So how important is having a good voice for a podcaster, or is the content more important?
The content is the most important. Obviously, the way that you present it matters. You can improve your voice as podcasting. I listened back to myself in 2014, and I sound very nervous because I was, and I don't sound particularly assured in the questions that I was asking. I was new to it. I was learning as I went along. You can improve your voice by listening to other podcasts, other broadcasters. Listen to the way that they deal with things. Once you start podcasting, you will start listening to radio in a totally different way. You will start listening to how a presenter deals with something, how they phrase a question. That will improve your technique. As regards the voice itself, I don't think there are many voices I've come across that can't be used on a podcast, so long as you are clear. If you have a very, very strong accent and you want to hit an international marketplace, you might need to think about toning down your accent. But on the whole, most people can podcast comfortably. You just need to practice and get used to the idea of being slow. The other thing about a podcast is you don't necessarily have anybody in front of you. So it can be quite, it's just you and a microphone and a voice in your headphones quite often. So you do have to get used to that as well.
There's one more question, Kiran. So where do you see the future of podcasts versus small sized videos and its space versus radio?
That was certainly in the United Kingdom, it is seen that podcasting is seeing off radio. That increasingly, particularly with the younger audience where they're used to watching or listening to things on YouTube when they want to, the idea of listening to live radio, which somebody else controls when you hear things, doesn't really sit well with the younger listener. So they are moving predominantly to podcasts. The statistic was that in the UK and the US, people between the ages of 12 and 34, 50% of them had listened to a podcast in the last month. That was higher than the number that had listened to the radio. So it is viewed certainly in the US and the UK that podcasts is going to overtake radio eventually. Even the BBC now does things on podcasting that they no longer broadcast.
One last question, and I think I would also like to know about this. Any favorite brands of yours that leverage podcasts to further enhance their brand engagement or their brand building?
Oh, that's a very, very good question, which is what every speaker says when they need time to think of an answer. Do you know, actually, researching for this, I really got into the Cement Association's podcast. I've actually been listening to it, and it's not my area of expertise. It's not my area of interest. There are so many great brands out there. I already listened to the HPZ podcast that I showed you. I have started listening to the Cement Association. There are so many great podcasts that you don't always come across because they are for a niche marketplace. I can see, so favorite brands. I am going to fall back on Caterpillar, actually. I know it's one of the examples I gave you, but again, it's something that's taken something that is not perhaps the most exciting product in the world. It's a big yellow digger and has created a very interesting marketplace around it. They actually have a number of podcasts that they do, and they have moved very strongly into the podcast space. They were doing video, but now they've realized, because they thought big yellow diggers were very visual, but they've actually moved far more into the podcasting world.
Thank you so much for the amazing session and for taking up the questions, Kiran. And I am sure that a lot of people must have been inspired from the session and got enough knowledge and practical knowledge to actually start their journey in podcasting or their brand's journey, so that they can leverage this new emerging marketing tool and for their own personal brand or for their company or business. So thank you again. And it's great. It has been great to have you here. Thank you everyone who are here, who enjoyed the session and learned from it. We are going to move to the next session. Thank you so much, Kiran, for this.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for listening.